For 37 years, my wife Margaret and I lived in perfect harmony. But last Tuesday, when I mentioned our anniversary trip to Hawaii, she froze mid-coffee sip. Her hands trembled. "That's wonderful, Knox," she whispered, but her eyes darted to our family photo. Something was terribly wrong. After she left for her book club, I found fresh tire tracks in our garage from a truck I didn't recognize. My gut twisted. Tomorrow I'd pretend to leave for Hawaii. Tonight I'd prepare to watch my own home. The morning sun cast long shadows across our kitchen as I performed my rehearsed departure routine. Margaret bustled around, helping me pack, but her movements seemed mechanical forced. Every smile appeared painted on never quite reaching her eyes. "Don't forget your blood pressure medication," she said, tucking the bottle into my carry-on. Her fingers lingered on the bag's zipper, and I caught her glancing at the kitchen clock for the third time in 5 minutes. "You seem nervous, honey," I ventured, watching her reaction carefully. "Everything all right?" "Oh, just sad to see you go without me," she replied quickly. Too quickly. "But someone needs to watch the house, and with my sister being sick—" Her sister lived in Portland, perfectly healthy, according to her Facebook posts from yesterday's hiking trip. But I nodded, playing along with whatever fiction she was weaving. The taxi arrived at precisely 10 o'clock. As I loaded my suitcase into the trunk, I noticed our elderly neighbor, Walter, trimming his already immaculate hedges, his sharp eyes tracking my movements. At 82, the man moved with surprising agility, and something in his expression made me pause. He gave an almost imperceptible nod before returning to his pruning. "Aloha, baby." I called out to Margaret, who stood in the doorway, wringing her hands. "I'll call when I land." The taxi pulled away, and I forced myself not to look back. The driver, a chatty fellow named Bert, regaled me with stories about his own trips to Hawaii as we headed to the airport. I responded appropriately, all while my mind raced through the plan I'd hastily formed the night before. At the departure terminal, I paid Bert generously and wheeled my suitcase inside. But instead of checking in, I made my way to the rental car area. 20 minutes later, I drove out in a nondescript gray sedan, my luggage in the trunk heading not to paradise, but to the Riverside Motel on the other side of town. The room smelled of industrial cleaner and broken dreams, but it would serve my purpose. I unpacked my surveillance equipment, binoculars I'd bought that morning, a camera, with a telephoto lens borrowed from my photography enthusiast friend Carl, and a notebook to document everything I observed. By the time darkness fell, I was positioned in our old gardening shed at the back of our property. I'd built this shed myself 15 years ago, installing a small window that provided a perfect view of our house. Margaret never came here anymore, claiming the space was too dusty for her allergies. The house stood quiet for hours. Margaret moved through the rooms, following her usual routine dinner alone, watching her evening shows, checking her phone repeatedly. At 11:30, headlights swept across our driveway. My breath caught as a familiar pickup truck pulled in. The driver killed the engine and sat in darkness for several minutes before emerging. My son David. The coffee mug I'd brought tumbled from my numb fingers, splashing lukewarm liquid across the shed floor. David was supposed to be in state prison serving 5 years for embezzling $300,000 from my construction company. I'd testified against him myself, watching as they led him away in handcuffs 18 months ago. Yet here he stood in my driveway, looking healthier than ever. He walked to the front door with confidence, producing a key I didn't know he possessed. Margaret met him at the threshold, pulling him into an embrace that lasted too long for a woman who'd claimed she'd disowned him after his betrayal. They disappeared inside, and I crept closer to the house, my joints protesting the sudden movement. Through the living room window, I watched them sit close together on the sofa, Margaret's hand covering David's, as they engaged in intense conversation. My hiding spot behind the azalea bushes offered limited visibility, but I could see David gesturing emphatically while Margaret nodded. They stood, and I ducked lower as they moved toward the basement door. The light flicked on down there, and I heard the scrape of heavy objects being moved. "Knox Hamilton, what exactly do you think you're doing?" The gravelly voice behind me nearly stopped my heart. I spun around to find Walter standing there in dark clothing, looking like an octogenarian ninja. Before I could stammer out an explanation, he held up one gnarled hand. "Keep your voice down, son. I know you're supposed to be halfway to Honolulu right now." His eyes glinted in the moonlight. "Been watching them myself for weeks. Your boy's been coming around regular like always after dark." "But he's in prison," I whispered, my world tilting off its axis. Walter shook his head slowly. "Early release. Good behavior overcrowding some such nonsense. Been out for 2 months. He studied my face carefully. "She didn't tell you, did she?" The question hung between us like a loaded weapon. Through the window we could see David emerging from the basement carrying a heavy box, Margaret following with another. "Tomorrow night," Walter said quietly, placing a weathered hand on my shoulder. "At midnight you'll see and understand everything. For now, get back to wherever you're hiding." "And Knox," he squeezed my shoulder. "Prepare yourself. What's coming? It's bigger than just your boy visiting after dark." I wanted to demand answers, to storm into my own home and confront them. But something in Walter's expression stopped me. This man who'd lived next door for 20 years, who'd never involved himself in anyone's business, was trying to help me. I nodded and retreated to the shed. David loaded 4 boxes into his truck before embracing Margaret again. As he drove away, I noticed he turned his lights off until he reached the main road. Margaret stood in the doorway watching him go, and even from my distance I could see her shoulders shaking. But whether from tears of sadness or relief, I couldn't tell. The next morning I called Margaret from my motel room, spinning tales of beautiful beaches and perfect weather. She sounded brighter than she had in months. "Oh, Knox, that sounds wonderful. I'm so glad you're enjoying yourself," she chirped. "Everything's fine here, quiet as usual." After hanging up, I sat on the lumpy motel bed, staring at the water-stained ceiling. My wife of nearly 4 decades was lying to me with frightening ease. My son, who I thought was paying for his crimes, was free and meeting with her in secret. And our mysterious neighbor seemed to know more about my family than I did. Tomorrow couldn't come fast enough. Whatever truth awaited me at midnight, I would face it. The silent wolf inside me was awakening, and heaven help anyone who had betrayed my trust. Because Knox Hamilton didn't become successful in the construction business by rolling over when someone tried to tear down what he'd built. And if someone was trying to demolish my life, they were about to learn that this old wolf still had teeth. The second day of my phantom vacation began with a call from Margaret's sister in Portland. The real one. "Knox, I tried calling the house, but Margaret didn't answer. Is everything okay?" "By tot." I gripped the motel phone tighter. "She mentioned you were sick, Janet. How are you feeling?" A pause. "Sick, I just ran a half marathon yesterday. What are you talking about?" "Must have misunderstood," I managed. "Probably meant someone else. You know how she gets names mixed up." After promising to have Margaret call her, I hung up and added another lie to the growing list. The woman who prided herself on remembering every birthday anniversary and doctor's appointment in the family had apparently forgotten which sister was supposedly ill. I spent the morning at the motel's business center using their computer to access our bank accounts. What I found made my blood run cold. Over the past 6 months, Margaret had made dozens of withdrawals from our joint savings, always just under the $10,000 limit that would trigger federal reporting, the total $400,000. Each withdrawal had my signature, except I hadn't signed a single one. My hands shook as I printed the statements. Margaret had mastered my signature so perfectly that even I had to look twice to spot the subtle differences. The backward slant on the K, the slightly too perfect loop in the X. Details only someone who'd spent years writing that name would notice. That afternoon, I installed a hidden camera in the shed. The device no bigger than a button would give me a clearer view of whatever transpired. As darkness approached, I positioned myself again, this time with a tablet connected to the camera feed. Margaret appeared restless, pacing the house and checking her phone every few minutes. At 9 o'clock, she made a call. "Richard." "Yes, he's gone." "No, I'm certain. He called from the hotel this morning. Tomorrow night? Yes. I understand. I love you too." The tablet slipped from my hands. Richard. My brother Richard, who I hadn't spoken to in 20 years. Our falling out over the family business had been bitter absolute. He'd wanted to cut corners on a hospital project to use substandard materials. When I refused, he'd tried to go behind my back. I'd bought him out, banished him from the company and my life. Now he was telling my wife he loved her. I was still reeling when Walter appeared beside me like a ghost. This time I didn't even flinch. "Figured you'd be back," he said, settling onto an overturned bucket with surprising grace. "Time you knew what you're dealing with." He pulled out an expensive phone, swiping through photos. "Been documenting this for a while now. Call it a hobby for an old fool with too much time." The first image showed Margaret at a coffee shop with a man in a suit. That's Gregory Harrison, psychiatrist specializing in elder care, specifically involuntary commitment. My stomach churned. The next photo showed Margaret, David, and Richard at what looked like a law office. "Estate attorney," Walter explained. "Richard's buddy from way back. They've been meeting regular for months." "How long have you known?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "Started noticing things about 4 months ago. Your wife began telling the neighbors you were getting forgetful. Little things at first. Said you'd forgotten her birthday, left the stove on, got lost coming home from the store." "None of that happened." "I know." Walter's voice held sympathy. "But she was building a narrative. Then I saw her putting something in your evening tea one night through the kitchen window. Looked like she was crushing pills. The dizzy spells. The foggy mornings where I couldn't quite remember going to bed. I'd attributed it to age, to working too hard. Margaret had been so concerned, so caring, insisting I rest more. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. Walter was quiet for a moment. "Because 40 years ago I was FBI. Specialized in financial crimes, family fraud. Seen too many good people destroyed by those they trusted most. And because..." He hesitated. "Because you rebuilt my garage after that storm for cost no profit. Man who does that doesn't deserve what they're planning. Which is, your wife thinks you have early-stage dementia. She's been documenting incidents, building a case. Tomorrow night at midnight, that psychiatrist is coming to perform an emergency evaluation. With your son and brother as witnesses to your supposed decline, they'll have you committed to a memory care facility before dawn." I stared at him, unable to process the magnitude of the betrayal. "But I'm supposed to be in Hawaii." "Exactly. They'll claim you got confused, came home early, that you're having an episode. The sedatives she's been giving you will be in your system if they test you. You'll seem disoriented, angry, classic dementia patient in crisis." Through the window, I watched Margaret water her orchids, the same woman who'd stood beside me at our wedding, who'd held my hand through my father's funeral, who'd cheered at our children's graduations. When had she become a stranger? "There's more," Walter said gently. "Pull up your property records online when you get back to the motel. Check the deed transfers from the last year." I didn't want to know more, but I had to. "What will I find?" "That your vacation home in Colorado, the one you haven't visited since last summer? She sold it 3 months ago. Forged your signature using the power of attorney from your gallbladder surgery." The Colorado house. Our retreat, where we'd planned to spend our golden years. Where I'd taught David to fish in the creek behind the property. Gone. The money's in accounts under David's name. Walter continued. "Along with what she pulled from your savings. They're not just trying to put you away, Knox. They're dismantling your entire life, piece by piece." Rage bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, but I forced it down. The silent wolf doesn't howl in anger. He waits. He watches. He plans. "What else do you know?" I asked. Walter smiled grimly. "Enough to help you turn the tables if you're willing to fight smart instead of hard. You were a good businessman, Knox. Time to make the deal of your life, your freedom and your future." We talked for another hour, Walter laying out what he'd observed, photographed, recorded from his property. By the time David's truck pulled into the driveway again at 11:30, I had the beginnings of a plan. This time, David wasn't alone. A young woman stepped out of the passenger side, someone I didn't recognize. They entered the house, and through the camera feed, I watched them join Margaret in the dining room. Papers spread across the table. The woman appeared to be explaining something, pointing at different documents, while Margaret and David nodded. "Financial advisor," Walter murmured. "Helping them structure the assets post-commitment, making sure everything's tied up neat and legal once you're declared incompetent." I recorded everything, the camera capturing their faces, the documents, their casual discussion of my future, as if I were already gone. At one point, Margaret laughed at something David said, and the sound cut through me like a blade. When had her laugh become something that hurt instead of healed? As midnight approached, they cleared the table. David hugged his mother longer than necessary, and I heard him say, "Tomorrow night, Mom, then you'll be free. Free from me, from the man who'd loved her since we were 22 years old." After they left, Margaret stood in the dining room alone. For just a moment, her mask slipped. She looked older, tired, something like regret flickering across her features. Then she straightened her shoulders and headed upstairs to our bedroom. To sleep in the bed we'd shared for decades, dreaming of her freedom. "Tomorrow night," Walter said, standing with a grunt. "Be ready for anything. And Knox, whatever happens, remember the truth is your weapon. Use it wisely." I spent the rest of the night in that shed, memorizing every detail of my home, my life, my marriage. By dawn, I was back at the motel, exhausted but determined. I had one day to prepare for the fight of my life. One day to save myself from the people who were supposed to love me most. The silent wolf had identified the threats. Now it was time to become the predator instead of the prey. Tomorrow at midnight they expected to cage me. They had no idea that the cage door swung both ways. Sleep eluded me that third morning as I lay in the motel bed staring at the ceiling while my mind raced through decades of memories. When had Margaret's love transformed into this elaborate betrayal? I searched for signs I'd missed, moments when the mask might have slipped. The phone rang at 7, jarring me from my thoughts. Margaret's cheerful voice filled my ear. "Good morning, sweetheart. How's paradise?" "Beautiful." I lied, marveling at how easily deception came now. "Thinking of extending the trip a few days." A pause. Then, too quickly, "Oh, that's wonderful. You deserve a long rest. Don't worry about anything here." After hanging up, I showered and drove to meet Tom Morrison, my lawyer for the past 25 years. His office occupied the top floor of a building I'd constructed in the 90s. Tom's secretary, recognizing me, despite my supposed absence, ushered me straight in. "Knox, I thought you were in Hawaii." Tom's bushy eyebrows rose above his wire-rimmed glasses. "That's what everyone's supposed to think." I placed the bank statements on his desk. "I need your help, Tom, and everything I'm about to tell you stays between us." For the next hour, I laid out the conspiracy. Tom's expression grew increasingly grim as he examined the forged signatures, the unauthorized withdrawals, the property transfer documents Walter had helped me print. "Jesus Christ, Knox, your own family." "The midnight evaluation is tonight. I need to be ready." Tom leaned back, his leather chair creaking. "First, we freeze the accounts Margaret doesn't know about. Your personal investments, the bonds, the separate business holdings. I'll file emergency injunctions this afternoon. Can we stop the commitment?" If we can prove conspiracy and fraud, absolutely. But Knox, you'll need more than financial documents. You need evidence of their direct involvement, their planning, their intent. I'm working on that. My next stop was Jacob Reynolds, a private investigator who'd helped me with corporate espionage issues years earlier. His office tucked above a bail bondsman's shop hadn't changed much. Neither had Jake, still built like a linebacker despite being north of 60. Knox Hamilton. He grinned, crushing my hand in his grip. What brings you to my humble establishment? I showed him everything. Jake whistled low when he saw Richard's involvement. Your brother always was a piece of work. Give me 6 hours. I'll have everything you need to bury them. True to his word, Jake called that afternoon with devastating intelligence. Richard had been living beyond his means for years, drowning in debt from failed business ventures. He'd reconnected with Margaret through Facebook, initially asking for a loan. When she'd refused, citing my certain rejection, he'd planted seeds of doubt about my mental state. Here's the kicker, Jake said. Richard owes 300 grand to some very unpleasant people, the kind who break bones when payments are late. Getting his hands on your money isn't just greed, it's survival. The Colorado house sale had netted $800,000. Combined with the $400,000 from our savings, they'd accumulated $1.2 million. Enough to pay Richard's debts and set everyone up comfortably while I rotted in a memory care facility. That evening I met with Detective Patricia Morse, an old friend from my days building the new police station. Pat had always shot straight with me, and tonight was no exception. If what you're showing me is accurate, we're looking at multiple felonies, she said, reviewing the evidence. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy. The sedatives are especially damning. That's assault. Will you help? Pat nodded. I'll be there tonight, but Knox, I'll need to stay hidden until the right moment. We need them to commit to their plan, make their intentions crystal clear. Can you handle that? I've handled worse. My final preparation involved Walter, who revealed more about his FBI background than he'd ever shared in 20 years of neighborly small talk. Turns out he'd been instrumental in breaking up several family fraud rings targeting elderly victims. The key, he explained, showing me where to place the recording devices he'd procured, is to let them think they're in control. Arrogance makes people careless. They'll spell out everything if they believe you're helpless. As darkness fell on my last night of supposed freedom, I positioned myself in the guest bedroom of my own home, having entered through the basement door I'd secretly kept a key to. Tom waited in his car down the street. Jake sat in the shed with his camera equipment. Pat and a colleague monitored everything from an unmarked van. Walter maintained watch from his property. At 11:45, Margaret began preparing. I watched through a crack in the door as she set the stage, leaving cabinet doors open, scattering papers on the floor, even breaking a lamp to suggest violence. She was creating the scene of a demented man's rampage. The doorbell rang at precisely midnight. Margaret answered, feigning surprise. Dr. Harrison, what are you doing here at this hour? Your brother-in-law called, the psychiatrist replied smoothly. He's concerned about Knox, said he received some disturbing calls from Hawaii. Richard appeared from the shadows of the porch, followed by David. They entered my home like they owned it, which I suppose they believed they soon would. Where is he? Dr. Harrison asked, already filling out paperwork on his clipboard. That's just it. Margaret wrung her hands. He's supposed to be in Hawaii. If he's been calling Richard making threats. Classic dementia behavior. The doctor nodded sagely. Confusion about location, paranoid ideation. We should check the house. They moved through the rooms discussing my symptoms as if diagnosing a patient in absentia. Richard embellished stories of confused phone calls I'd never made. David mentioned finding me wandering the neighborhood last month, complete with concerned witnesses who'd surely corroborate if asked. All lies but woven with enough detail to sound plausible. The financial discrepancies are particularly troubling, Dr. Harrison noted. Margaret tells me he's been giving away large sums to strangers. He's always been generous, Richard added with fake concern. But lately it's been irrational. Thousands of dollars to random charities people on the street. We're worried he'll lose everything. The irony of my brother expressing concern about my finances while plotting to steal them would have been amusing if it weren't so infuriating. I have the commitment papers prepared. Dr. Harrison produced a thick folder. Based on the documented incidents and family testimony, I'm recommending immediate placement at Sunshine Manor. They specialize in combative dementia patients. Combative. They were already painting me as violent, dangerous. Someone who needed to be locked away for everyone's safety. How long? Margaret asked, her voice small. Indefinitely. With his apparent rapid decline, I'd say he needs permanent custodial care. And his assets, Richard cutting to the chase, would be managed by his designated power of attorney. The doctor glanced at Margaret. I assume that's you. She nodded, producing documents. From his surgery last year. He insisted I have full authority if anything happened to him. If anything happened, like being drugged, framed, and imprisoned by my loved ones. We should search the property, David suggested. If he's confused about being in Hawaii, he might be hiding somewhere. This was my cue. I stepped out of the guest room disheveled from 3 days of surveillance, unshaven and wild-eyed from lack of sleep. I must have looked exactly like the demented old man they'd described. Margaret, I called out, adding a tremor to my voice. What's happening? Who are these people? The tableau froze. Then Margaret gasped, her hand flying to her chest in a performance worthy of an Oscar. Honatsanaki! What Knox? Oh my God, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be in Hawaii! I blinked in feigned confusion, swaying slightly. Hawaii. No, I've been watching. From the shed. Someone's been stealing from us, Margaret. I saw them. Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his voice taking on that condescending tone medical professionals reserve for the mentally incompetent. Mr. Hamilton, I'm Dr. Harrison. Your family is worried about you. Why don't we sit down and talk? I don't know you. I backed away, letting panic creep into my voice. Margaret, why is Richard here? He's not welcome in this house. He tried to destroy my business. Richard stepped forward, hands raised placatingly. Knox, buddy, that was 20 years ago. We're brothers. I'm here to help. Liar! I pointed an accusing finger. You're all liars. I saw you taking boxes, planning things. Where's my money? What did you do with our savings? Margaret began to cry, right on cue. This is worse than I thought. He's paranoid delusional. Doctor, please, we need to get him help before he hurts himself or someone else. Dr. Harrison nodded gravely. Mr. Hamilton, I'm going to recommend a nice place where you can rest, get the help you need. Your family only wants what's best for you. No, I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair. I won't go. This is my house. I built this life. Dad, David stepped forward, and the word was a knife between my ribs. Please, you're sick. Let us help you. The son who'd stolen from me, who'd betrayed every lesson I'd taught him about integrity and honor, was now playing the concerned child. The performance was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed it myself. You were in prison, I whispered, letting confusion cloud my features. How are you here? Am I dreaming? He's dissociating, Dr. Harrison announced to the room. Classic symptom. We need to act quickly. The doctor reached into his bag, producing a syringe. This will calm him down for transport. This wasn't part of the plan. Panic, real this time, flooded my system. But before the doctor could approach the front door, burst open. Sarah, my daughter, stood in the doorway, still in her judge's robes from evening court. Her face was streaked with tears, her usual composure shattered. Stop! She commanded. And even in distress, her voice carried the authority of the bench. Nobody moves until I understand what's happening here. Margaret recovered first. Sarah, honey, your father is having an episode. He thinks he's been in Hawaii or watching the house, I don't know. Dr. Harrison is here to help." Sarah's eyes found mine, and in them I saw something that gave me hope, doubt. She wasn't entirely sold on their story. "Dad," she asked softly, "are you okay?" I wanted to tell her everything to expose the conspiracy right then, but Walter's words echoed in my mind. Let them think they're in control. So instead, I let my shoulders slump in defeat. "I don't know anymore, baby girl," I whispered. "I just don't know." Sarah's face crumpled, but she pulled herself together with visible effort. "I need to be part of this discussion. He's my father." "Of course," Dr. Harrison agreed smoothly. "Family support is crucial in these situations." They guided me to the living room, surrounding me like guards escorting a prisoner. I played my part, mumbling about conspiracies and theft, watching Margaret and Richard exchange satisfied glances. They thought they'd won. But the silent wolf was patient. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for them to step into it. The real show was about to begin. Sarah's presence shifted the room's dynamic in ways the conspirators hadn't anticipated. As a federal judge, she commanded respect, even in distress. Dr. Harrison suddenly seemed less assured, his clipboard held like a shield rather than a weapon. "I need to understand the timeline," Sarah said, settling beside me on the couch. Her hand found mine, squeezing gently. "When did these symptoms begin?" Margaret launched into her prepared narrative, but I noticed she kept glancing at David. My son stood by the window, unable to meet his sister's eyes. The siblings had always been close until his arrest. Sarah had recused herself from anything involving his case, but the betrayal had cut her deeply. "6 months ago, he forgot my birthday," Margaret began. "Then there were the times he got lost, driving home, left the stove on. Small things that became big things." "I see." Sarah's lawyer instincts kicked in. "Do we have documentation, medical evaluations, cognitive testing?" Dr. Harrison stepped forward. "Your mother has been keeping detailed notes. The pattern is concerning." "Notes aren't medical records," Sarah observed. "Has Dad seen his regular physician? Dr. Campbell has been treating him for 20 years. An uncomfortable silence. Richard filled it with bluster. "Campbell's old school. Might miss the signs. Dr. Harrison specializes in these cases. How fortunate that a specialist was available at midnight." Sarah's tone could have frozen fire. "Tell me, doctor, how do you know my uncle—" The psychiatrist shifted. "We've had professional interactions." I watched this exchange with genuine amazement. My brilliant daughter was dissecting their plan without even knowing it existed. But then David made a critical error. "Sarah, stop interrogating everyone," he snapped. "Can't you see Dad needs help, or are you too important now to care about family?" Sarah's eyes flashed. "You've been out of prison for 2 months without telling me, and you lecture me about family." The room went still. Margaret's face drained of color. "How did you—" David started. "I'm a federal judge, David. You think I wouldn't hear about my own brother's early release?" Sarah stood her robes billowing. "What I want to know is why our mother lied about it. Why you're here at midnight with Uncle Richard, who Dad banished from our lives. Why there's a psychiatrist ready to commit our father based on notes and hearsay. This wasn't going according to their script." I could see Richard's jaw working, calculating how to salvage the situation. "Sarah, sweetheart." Margaret tried. "There are things you don't understand. Your father's condition?" "What condition?" Sarah wheeled on her. "The man sitting here who built a construction empire from nothing, who argued cases with me last month about constitutional law. That man has dementia." "You don't see him every day," Margaret insisted. "The confusion, the paranoia, like thinking people are plotting against him." Sarah's voice dripped sarcasm. "How paranoid of him." Dr. Harrison cleared his throat. "Miss Hamilton—" "Judge Hamilton," Sarah corrected icily. "And I'd like to see your credentials, doctor, your license, your hospital affiliations. I assume you brought them for a midnight house call." The psychiatrist's face reddened. "I don't appreciate the implication." and I don't appreciate finding my family staging what looks suspiciously like an ambush commitment. Sarah pulled out her phone. Should I call Dad's real doctor, or maybe the medical board to verify your credentials? There's no need for threats, Richard interjected. We're all family here. Are we? Sarah looked at him with contempt. Last I heard you were trying to destroy Dad's business. Now you're concerned about his health. How touching. I watched my daughter work with pride and growing hope. But then she turned to me, and her expression softened. Dad, I need you to be honest. Have you been confused? Forgetful. This was the moment of truth. I could expose everything, but something in Sarah's manner held me back. She was building to something. Maybe, I admitted. Your mother says I have been. Mom says a lot of things, Sarah replied, studying Margaret. Like how her sister in Portland is sick. I called Aunt Janet yesterday, Mom. She just ran a half marathon. Margaret's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. David stepped forward protectively. Leave Mom alone. She's been carrying this burden for months. What burden? Sarah's voice cracked like a whip. Taking care of the man who loved her for 40 years, who gave her everything that's a burden. You don't understand the stress, David protested. The financial pressure. Financial pressure. Sarah laughed bitterly. Our parents are millionaires, David. What financial pressure could there possibly be unless... Her eyes widened. Oh my God, the money! This is about money! That's ridiculous, Richard said quickly. Too quickly. Sarah pulled out her phone again. I'm calling Patricia Morse. She owes me a favor from the Hutchinson case. The detective... Margaret's voice went up an octave. Why would you need... Because something stinks here, Sarah said bluntly. Dad supposedly has dementia, but only when it's convenient. David's here fresh out of prison. Uncle Richard appears after 20 years. And there's a psychiatrist ready with commitment papers at midnight. Please. She started dialing. Richard moved to stop her, but I found my voice. Sarah, wait. Everyone turned to me. I let confusion cross my face again. Maybe they're right. I have been feeling strange. The trip to Hawaii that I don't remember booking. Finding myself in the shed watching the house. Maybe I do need help. Sarah searched my eyes, and I tried to convey silently what I couldn't say aloud. Trust me. Play along. She lowered the phone slowly. If you think you need help, Dad, then we'll get it. But we do this right. Tomorrow with your real doctor, second opinions, proper evaluations. Not some midnight ambush. That's not how this works, Dr. Harrison interjected. When a patient presents with acute symptoms, my father isn't presenting with anything except exhaustion and confusion at finding strangers in his home at midnight, Sarah shot back. Unless you have a court order or evidence of immediate danger, you have no authority here. He could hurt himself, Margaret pleaded. Or someone else. Sarah, please, I've seen things. What things, Mother? Sarah's voice could have cut glass. Be specific. What have you seen? Margaret glanced desperately at David, then Richard. I could see their carefully rehearsed plan crumbling. They'd expected me to be alone, vulnerable. Sarah's presence, her legal knowledge, her protective instincts, none of it was in their script. There was the stove incident, Margaret stammered. When? 2 months ago. I was here 2 months ago, Sarah said slowly. We cooked dinner together. Dad made his famous pot roast. The only person who left the stove on was you when you burned the tea kettle. The lie hung in the air like smoke. David tried to salvage it. There were other incidents. Were there... Sarah turned on him. You've been secretly visiting Mom while Dad thinks you're in prison. What else have you been doing, David, helping with these incidents? My son's face flushed. How dare you? How dare I? Sarah's composure finally cracked. You stole from our father from the company he built with his bare hands, and now you're here participating in whatever this is. It's not what you think, Margaret said weakly. Then explain it, Sarah demanded. Explain why there's a psychiatrist here at midnight. Explain why David's been sneaking around. Explain why Uncle Richard suddenly cares about Dad's health. Explain any of it in a way that doesn't sound like conspiracy to commit elder fraud. The words hung in the air like a verdict. I saw Richard's face go pale. Dr. Harrison took a step backward. Even David looked shaken. But it was Margaret's reaction that cut deepest. Her shoulders sagged, tears streaming down her face. And for a moment, I saw the woman I'd married. The one who'd stood by me through poverty and success, through joy and loss. Then her face hardened, and she became a stranger again. "You always take his side," she whispered to Sarah. "Always Daddy's little girl. You don't know what it's been like living in his shadow always. Knox Hamilton's wife, never just Margaret." "So you decided to what?" Sarah's voice broke. "Drug him, steal from him, lock him away." The accusation hung there. Margaret's eyes widened. "How did you—" She caught herself, but too late. Sarah's legal mind had led her to the truth through pure instinct, and Margaret had just confirmed it. "My God," Sarah breathed. "You've been drugging him. The confusion, the memory issues. You've been creating the symptoms." "That's slander," Dr. Harrison said quickly. "I could have you disbarred." "Try it," Sarah snarled. "Please try it. I would love to depose you under oath about your midnight medical evaluations and your relationship with my uncle." Richard stepped forward. "Everyone calm down. This is getting out of hand." Out of hand. I stood letting my voice shake with what they'd interpret as confusion, but was actually rage. "My family is discussing me like I'm not here, talking about locking me away, taking my money, and it's just now getting out of hand." "Dad." Sarah caught my arm. "Let me handle this." But I was done being silent, done pretending. The wolf had watched long enough. "No," I said firmly. "I want to know something. Margaret, after 40 years of marriage, what did I do to deserve this? Was I cruel? Did I neglect you? Did I not provide for our family?" She couldn't meet my eyes. "You wouldn't understand." "Try me." "You were perfect." The words exploded from her. Perfect husband, perfect father, perfect businessman. Do you know what it's like living with perfection, never measuring up, always being the wife who couldn't keep the books straight, who burned dinners, who wasn't as smart as the great Knox Hamilton? I never said, "You didn't have to, everyone knew. Poor Margaret, lucky to land such a successful man. Thank God Knox takes care of everything. Where would she be without him?" The venom in her voice was decades old, fermented into something toxic. I stared at the woman I thought I knew, seeing a stranger wearing her face. "So your solution was to destroy me?" "It wasn't supposed to be like this," she said quietly. "Richard said it would be simple. A nice facility, the best care. You'd be happy and I'd finally be free." "Free," I repeated, "and wealthy." Her silence was admission enough. "What about me?" David demanded. "Dad testified against his own son, sent me to prison. You stole from me." The words ripped from my throat. "From your family's legacy." "I made a mistake," David shouted back. "But you couldn't forgive, couldn't forget. The great Knox Hamilton couldn't have a failure for a son. You were never a failure until you chose to be a thief." The room erupted. David lunging forward, Richard restraining him, Dr. Harrison backing toward the door, Margaret sobbing. And through it all, Sarah stood like a lighthouse in a storm, her presence the only thing keeping complete chaos at bay. That's when Walter's text came through, "Now." The front door opened, and Detective Patricia Morse entered with 2 uniformed officers. The room froze in a tableau of guilt and shock. "Evening, folks," Pat said calmly. "We've been monitoring this situation. I think we need to have a conversation about conspiracy fraud and attempted false imprisonment." Dr. Harrison made a break for the back door but found Jake blocking his path camera in hand. "Smile, Doc. You're gonna be famous." Tom Morrison entered next, briefcase in hand. "Knox, I've filed the injunctions. All accounts are frozen pending investigation. The trap had snapped shut, but I found no satisfaction in it. Looking at my family's faces, I saw only waste. 40 years of love, trust, and building a life together destroyed by greed and resentment. Sarah's hand found mine again. Dad, you okay? No, I admitted, but I will be. The silent wolf had won, but victories I was learning could taste as bitter as defeat. The next hour unfolded like a surreal stage play, where everyone knew their lines except the original cast. Detective Morse directed the scene with practiced efficiency, separating the conspirators for individual questioning, while her officers secured evidence. I want a lawyer, Richard declared, straightening his tie as if dignity could be salvaged from disaster. That's your right, Pat replied evenly. But you might want to hear what we have first. Your nephew Jake here has been thorough. Financial records going back 6 months, recorded conversations, even video of you discussing how to divide Knox's assets. My favorite part is where you joke about him drooling in a nursing home while you spend his money. Richard's manufactured confidence crumbled. Beside him, Dr. Harrison looked like he might vomit. The psychiatrist kept glancing at his medical bag, probably calculating whether his career would survive the night. Margaret sat on the couch, her perfect posture finally broken. She stared at her hands as if surprised to find them attached to her wrists. David paced like a caged animal, muttering about entrapment and setup. "This is ridiculous," he spat. "You can't arrest us for trying to help my father." "Help." Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you call forgery, theft, attempted kidnapping?" Kidnapping. David's voice cracked. "He's sick, Mom said." "Mom lied," Sarah stated flatly, "and you knew it. Or did you think Dad's signatures forged themselves onto those withdrawal slips? I watched my family implode with the detached fascination of someone observing a car accident. The pain would come later, I knew. Right now, adrenaline and exhaustion created a buffer between me and the full impact of their betrayal. "Mr. Hamilton." Detective Morse approached me. "We need to get you to the hospital for blood work. The sedatives in your system are evidence." "I'm fine," I protested, though the room tilted slightly when I stood. "Dad," Sarah's judge voice brooked no argument. "We need documentation. Chain of custody for evidence. You know this." She was right. I'd built enough legal cases to understand the importance of proper procedures. But the thought of leaving my house, my sanctuary turned battlefield, felt like retreat. "I'll drive him," Sarah offered, then turned to the detective. "Unless you need me here." Pat shook her head. "We've got what we need for now. Take care of your father. We'll be in touch tomorrow for formal statements." As we prepared to leave, Margaret finally spoke. "Knox." I paused at the door, but didn't turn around. "I did love you once," she whispered, "before it all got so complicated." The words hung between us like a bridge already burning. I could have responded, could have asked when love became complicated enough to justify destruction. Instead, I walked out, letting silence serve as my answer. Sarah's car smelled like leather and justice, if justice had a scent. She drove carefully through the empty streets, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. 3 days. Walter caught me watching the house from the shed. Walter Brennan, the neighbor. Former FBI. Apparently, retirement doesn't cure the instinct to investigate suspicious behavior. Sarah managed a weak smile. "Thank God for nosy neighbors." The smile faded. "Dad, what Mom said about living in your shadow." "Don't." I cut her off. "Don't try to rationalize what they did. Whatever grievances Margaret harbored, she had 40 years to talk to me. Instead, she chose this." "I know. I just..." Sarah's voice broke. "How did I not see it? I'm trained to read people to spot lies. But my own family fooled me completely." They fooled me too, baby girl, and I lived with her every day. Not David, she said quietly. I knew something was off when he got early release and didn't contact me. We were close before his arrest. The silence hurt, but now I understand. He was already planning this with Mom. The hospital's emergency room blazed with fluorescent honesty. No shadows here to hide secrets or betrayals. The attending physician, a young woman who looked barely older than my grandchildren, would be if I had any listened to our story with widening eyes. Sedatives without consent is assault, she said firmly. We'll run a comprehensive tox screen, document everything. Do you know what she was giving you? Her evening tea special, I said bitterly. Chamomile with a side of betrayal. The blood draw was simple. Waiting for results, less so. Sarah sat beside me in the uncomfortable plastic chair holding my hand, like she had when she was small and scared of thunderstorms. Now she was a federal judge, and I was the one needing comfort. What happens next? I asked. Criminal charges, Sarah said simply. Fraud, forgery, elder abuse, conspiracy. David violated his parole by participating. He'll go back to prison probably for the full original sentence, plus new time. And your mother? Sarah's jaw tightened. She made her choice, Dad. Actions have consequences even for mothers. This will affect your career. Federal judge with a criminal family. Stop. Sarah squeezed my hand. My career survived David's embezzlement. It'll survive this, too. You're the victim here, not the perpetrator. Victim. The word tasted sour. Knox Hamilton, who'd built an empire from nothing, who'd survived economic downturns and industry upheavals, reduced to victim status by the people he'd trusted most. The test results confirmed what we already knew. Benzodiazepines in my system consistent with regular dosing over months. The doctor provided detailed documentation, her professional outrage barely contained. Elder abuse is more common than people think, she said. Usually financial, often by family members. But drugging someone to fake dementia, that's a new low. By the time we left the hospital, dawn was breaking. The world looked different in the early light, sharper somehow, as if the past 3 days had adjusted my vision permanently. Sarah drove us back to my house, where crime scene tape decorated my front door like the world's worst welcome banner. You can't stay here tonight, Sarah said. Come to my place. No. I stared at the house I'd built, the home where I'd raised my children, loved my wife, lived my life. I won't be driven from my own home by ghosts and bad memories. Dad, I'll stay at the Riverside Motel one more night. Tomorrow I start reclaiming my life. Sarah didn't argue. She knew that tone, the one that had built a construction empire and raised 2 children to be strong. Well, raised one successfully anyway. I'll help, she promised. Whatever you need. Legal advice, emotional support, someone to scream at. I'm here. I know, baby girl, I know. After she left, I stood in my driveway, watching the sun rise over the house that no longer felt like home. Neighbors were beginning to stir, probably wondering about the police presence, the drama that had shattered our quiet street's peace. Walter appeared at his hedge, pruning shears in hand, despite the early hour. He nodded once, a gesture that conveyed understanding, sympathy, and respect. No words needed? Sometimes men communicated best through silence. I returned to the motel, exhausted beyond measure, but unable to sleep. Instead, I sat at the small desk and began making lists. Lawyers to call, accounts to secure, locks to change, a life to rebuild at 68 when I should have been planning fishing trips and grandchildren visits. The phone rang. Tom Morrison already at work despite the early hour. Knox, I've been going through the papers. The scope of this thing, they were systematic. Margaret used the power of attorney to change beneficiaries on your life insurance, your retirement accounts, everything. If something had happened to you in that facility, they'd have gotten everything I finished. Every penny. And with the documented dementia, no one would have questioned it. Can we recover it all? Most of it. The Colorado house is complicated since the sale went through, but we can sue for damages. The liquid assets are frozen. We'll get them back. Money? It always came down to money. I'd spent decades accumulating wealth thinking it would secure my family's future. Instead, it had destroyed my family entirely. Tom, I want to change my will. I figured you might. Sarah gets everything. Set up a foundation for elder abuse victims with part of it. Make sure Margaret gets exactly what she's entitled to by law, and not a penny more. What about David? David made his choice. He can live with the consequences. After ending the call, I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of betrayal. 40 years of marriage reduced to a criminal conspiracy. A son who'd chosen greed over gratitude. A brother whose resentment had festered into something monstrous. But also a daughter who'd stood by me. Neighbors who'd watched out for me. Friends who'd rallied to my defense. The wolf might be wounded, but he wasn't alone. Tomorrow would begin the legal proceedings, the formal statements, the public humiliation of watching my family's destruction play out in court. But tonight, in this shabby motel room, I grieved for what was lost and gathered strength for what was to come. The silent wolf had survived the ambush. Now it was time to rebuild the pack. The morning brought Jake Reynolds to my motel room carrying banker's boxes full of evidence and wearing a grim expression that aged his already weathered face. Knox, we need to talk about what I found. He spread photos across the bed like a dealer, showing particularly damning cards. This goes deeper than we thought. I studied the images Margaret at various banks, David meeting with people I didn't recognize, Richard entering what looked like a high-end law firm. But it was the last photo that stopped my heart, Sarah sitting in a coffee shop with David 2 weeks ago, passing him an envelope. No, I whispered. I'm sorry, Knox, I triple-checked. That's your daughter, and that envelope contained $5,000 in cash. The room spun. Not Sarah. She'd been my rock, my defender, the one pure thing in this cesspool of betrayal. There has to be an explanation. Jake nodded slowly. Could be, but you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that she's been playing both sides. The performance last night might have been just that, a performance. I sank onto the bed, my legs suddenly unable to support me. If Sarah was involved, then I truly had nothing left. No family, no trust, no foundation to rebuild upon. There's more, Jake continued reluctantly. Your office manager, Betty, she's been feeding information to Margaret, copies of contracts, financial statements, meeting schedules, and your foreman, Mike Kowalski, he's been inflating project costs and splitting the excess with David. Mike's worked for me 15 years, I protested weakly. Greed doesn't have a tenure requirement, Jake replied. I'm still digging, but Knox, you need to face facts. This wasn't just a family betrayal. They've been dismantling your life from every angle. After Jake left, I sat in stunned silence. How many others were involved? How long had I been surrounded by enemies pretending to be allies? The phone rang. Sarah. Dad, how are you feeling? Her voice sounded exactly the same, concerned, loving, protective. But then Margaret had sounded loving too, right until the end. Fine, I lied. Just tired. I'm meeting with the prosecutor this afternoon. They're fast-tracking the case given the evidence. Dad, I need to tell you something. My heart stopped. Here it comes, the confession, the revelation that would complete my destruction. I saw David 2 weeks ago, she continued. He contacted me, said he needed help. I know I should have told you, but I thought I could handle it myself. You gave him money. It wasn't a question. A pause. How did you know? $5,000, Sarah. Why? She sighed. He said he owed dangerous people, that they'd hurt him if he didn't pay. I thought, God, I'm so stupid. I thought if I helped him once he'd leave you alone. Instead, I probably funded their plan against you. Relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly wept. Not betrayal, just misguided compassion. Sarah's greatest flaw had always been trying to save everyone, including those who didn't deserve salvation. I'm sorry, Dad. I see now how he manipulated me, how they all did. Even last night, part of me wanted to believe Mom was just confused that there was some explanation that didn't involve deliberate cruelty. "You're not responsible for their choices," I told her. "David's always been skilled at manipulation. He learned from the best." We talked for another hour, planning legal strategies and next steps. By the time we hung up, some of my faith had been restored. Not everyone was an enemy. Not everyone wore a mask. That afternoon, I met with Detective Morse at the police station. The interrogation room smelled of old coffee and broken promises. Through the one-way mirror, I could see Margaret in the adjacent room looking haggard and years older than her 66 years. "She's been talking," Pat informed me. "Trying to minimize her involvement, blame everything on Richard and David. Claims you were emotionally abusive, controlling, building a defense already." Was I? The question escaped before I could stop it. Controlling, abusive. Pat studied me carefully. "Knox, I've been doing this job 30 years. I know abusers, and you're not one. Successful driven may be emotionally reserved." "Sure, but abuse, no. This is just her lawyers talking, trying to create reasonable doubt." Through the mirror, I watched my wife of 40 years twist her wedding ring, a nervous habit I'd found endearing once. She was talking animatedly to her lawyer, probably spinning tales of marital oppression that existed only in her rewritten history. "Richard singing like a canary," Pat continued. "Turns out he owes money to some seriously bad people. Russian mob connections. He saw your money as his lifeline and convinced Margaret you were an obstacle to everyone's happiness, including hers. Especially hers. He painted a picture of freedom, wealth, a new life. All she had to do was help remove you from the equation." And she agreed. The words tasted like ashes. She did more than agree. Some of this was her idea. The sedatives, her plan. She researched which drugs would mimic dementia symptoms without showing up on standard tests. If Walter hadn't been watching, if you hadn't gotten suspicious, their plan would have worked. I thought about those evening teas, Margaret's gentle insistence that I drink them for my health. How many nights had I sat across from her sipping poison, disguised as care, while she calculated how long until I'd be weak enough to cage. What happens now? Arraignment tomorrow, bail hearings, then the long march to trial. Knox, I need to warn you, this will get ugly. Their lawyers will dig into every aspect of your marriage, your business, your relationships. They'll try to paint you as the villain to justify their actions. "Let them try it," I said, finding steel in my spine. "I've got nothing to hide." But that night alone in the motel, I wondered if that were true. Every marriage has secrets, private moments that could be twisted by a clever attorney. Every successful businessman has made tough decisions that could be reframed as cruelty. Would a jury see Knox Hamilton the victim? Or Knox Hamilton the tyrant who drove his family to desperation? The next morning brought a circus to the courthouse. Word had leaked, and reporters gathered like vultures scenting carrion. Local business icons' family arrested in elder abuse scheme would make compelling headlines. I entered through a side door, accompanied by Tom Morrison and Sarah. The courtroom was packed with familiar faces. Employees, business associates, country club members, who'd known Margaret and me for decades. Their expressions ranged from shock to sympathy to poorly disguised excitement at witnessing such spectacular downfall. Margaret entered in shackles, the orange jumpsuit hanging loose on her frame. Our eyes met across the courtroom, and for a moment I saw the girl I'd married in 1987. Young, hopeful in love. Then she looked away, and the stranger returned. David followed defiant, even in custody. He stared straight ahead, jaw clenched, playing the victim even now. Richard brought up the rear, looking like he'd aged a decade overnight. The mighty businessman reduced to a common criminal, all because he couldn't admit failure and start over honestly. Judge Catherine Williams presided, a no-nonsense woman I'd met at several charity functions. She reviewed the charges with clinical detachment conspiracy to commit elder abuse, fraud, forgery, false imprisonment, assault. The list went on, each count another nail in the coffin of my former life. "How do you plead?" she asked each defendant. "Not guilty," they chorused as expected. Their lawyers made bail arguments. Margaret's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Cynthia Blackwood, painted her client as a devoted wife driven to extremity by an controlling husband. David's lawyer focused on his youth, his potential, the mistakes already paid for. Richard's representation barely tried, knowing his client's mob connections made bail unlikely. The prosecutor, ADA Michael Chen, systematically destroyed each argument. He presented bank records, forged documents, the toxicology report showing months of drugging. When he played a recording of Margaret discussing how to spend my money after commitment, several spectators gasped. "Your Honor?" Chen concluded. The defendants didn't just betray a family member. They attempted to steal a man's freedom, dignity, and life savings through systematic deception and chemical assault. The state requests remand without bail. Judge Williams considered, her face grave. Bail is set at $500,000 for Margaret Hamilton, $1 million for David Hamilton, given his prior conviction and parole violation. Richard Hamilton is remanded without bail due to flight risk and criminal associations. I watched them led away, Margaret stumbling slightly, David's defiance finally cracking, Richard deflating like a punctured balloon. Sarah's hand found mine, squeezing tight. "You okay?" she whispered. "Getting there," I replied, and for the first time in days it felt like truth. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Tom and Sarah flanked me as we pushed through the crowd. "Mr. Hamilton, how does it feel to see your family in custody?" "Tortsum, Knox, will you testify against your wife?" "Is it true about the drugging? For how long?" I stopped at Tom's car, turning to face the cameras. These vultures wanted a story, I'd give them one. "For 6 months, people I trusted conspired to destroy me," I said clearly. "They failed. I'm still standing. And I want anyone watching who might be suffering similar abuse to know you're not alone. Speak up. Get help. Don't let shame or love for your abusers silence you." "Do you still love your wife?" someone shouted. I considered the question, thinking of 40 years of memories now tainted beyond redemption. "I love who she used to be," I answered finally. "But that person is gone if she ever truly existed." In the car, Sarah broke down, crying. "I can't believe Mom did this, that she's capable of it. The woman who taught me about justice and kindness." "People change," I said gently, "or maybe they just reveal who they always were." That evening, I returned to my house for the first time since the confrontation. The crime scene tape was gone, but evidence of the investigation remained: fingerprint dust on surfaces, items moved from their usual places, the lamp Margaret had broken still lying in pieces. I walked through rooms that felt like a museum to a life that never quite existed. Photos of family vacations, where Margaret had apparently been counting my money. The kitchen where she'd prepared poisoned tea with loving hands. The bedroom where we'd slept side by side while she planned my imprisonment. In my study, I found something that stopped me cold: Margaret's journal left behind in the investigation. I knew I shouldn't read it, but curiosity won. The early entries were what I expected: wedding plans, pregnancy excitement, the small dramas of young marriage. But as years passed, the tone shifted. Resentment crept in, subtle at first, then overwhelming. She wrote of feeling invisible, overshadowed, reduced to Knox's wife, rather than her own person. One entry from 5 years ago. "He doesn't even see me anymore. Just another fixture in his perfect life, like the furniture he picks so carefully. Richard understands. Richard sees me." So it had started long before the conspiracy. The emotional affair that became something monstrous, fed by Richard's greed and Margaret's festering resentments. I closed the journal feeling hollow. Maybe I had failed her in ways I couldn't see. Maybe I'd been so focused on building our future that I'd neglected our present. But nothing justified what they'd done. Nothing. A knock interrupted my brooding. Walter stood at the door holding a casserole dish. "Figured you might not be up for cooking," he said simply. "Mary made her famous lasagna." I invited him in, grateful for the company. We ate in my kitchen, two old men who'd seen too much, understood betrayal too well. "How do you move past something like this?" I asked eventually. Walter considered. "You don't move past it, you move through it. Day by day until one morning you wake up and it hurts a little less. Then a little less. The scar remains, but it stops defining you." Voice of experience. "First wife embezzled from my FBI pension fund," he admitted. "Smaller scale than your situation, but betrayal's betrayal. Took me years to trust again. But I did. Met Mary, built a new life. You will too." After he left, I stood in my empty house, surrounded by ghosts and shattered trust. Tomorrow would bring more legal proceedings, more public humiliation, more revelations about how thoroughly I'd been deceived. But tonight I had lasagna from a caring neighbor, a daughter who stood by me, and the beginning of understanding that survival was its own form of victory. The silent wolf had been wounded, betrayed by his own pack. But he was still breathing, still fighting. And tomorrow the real hunt for justice would begin. 6 months passed before the trials began. 6 months of depositions, evidence reviews, and watching my private life dissected in legal documents. The prosecution built an airtight case, but the defense fought with the desperation of the cornered. I arrived at the courthouse early on the first day of Margaret's trial, wanting to avoid the media circus. But even at 7 in the morning, reporters had already staked out positions. I'd become the face of elder abuse survival, whether I wanted the role or not. Sarah met me in the parking garage, professional in her charcoal suit, but with circles under her eyes that matched my own. "Ready for this?" she asked. "No, but I'll do it anyway." The courtroom filled quickly. Margaret's supporters clustered on one side, her book club friends, her sister from Portland, who'd finally learned the truth, a few neighbors who still believed her version of events. My side held employees who'd remained loyal business associates, and Walter and Mary. Margaret entered, looking fragile, her hair styled carefully, wearing a conservative dress that screamed, "Wrongly accused grandmother." Her lawyer had coached her well. When our eyes met, she offered a tremulous smile that might have fooled someone who hadn't lived with her deceptions. The prosecution began with facts cold and damning. Bank records showing systematic theft, medical testimony about the effects of benzodiazepines, audio recordings of Margaret discussing my future imprisonment with casual cruelty. When Dr. Harrison took the stand as a prosecution witness, having cut a deal for his testimony, the full scope of the plan emerged. They'd intended to keep me sedated for weeks, possibly months, until my deterioration became undeniable. The facility they'd chosen specialized in patients with no hope of recovery. I would have died there forgotten and alone, while they divided my legacy. Margaret's defense relied on painting me as an emotional tyrant. Cynthia Blackwood called witness after witness to testify about my controlling nature. A woman from Margaret's yoga class claimed Margaret had confided about my jealousy. A grocery clerk testified I'd once berated Margaret for buying the wrong coffee brand. Each story contained a grain of truth twisted into something sinister. Yes, I'd been particular about coffee, but because of acid reflux, not control. Yes, I'd questioned Margaret's spending, but only when she'd bought a $12,000 handbag during a business downturn. When Margaret took the stand, she transformed into a victim before our eyes. Tears flowed as she described 40 years of emotional imprisonment, being reduced to a trophy wife, never allowed to pursue her dreams. "What dreams?" Prosecutor Chen asked on cross-examination. "The art gallery you opened that Mr. Hamilton funded, the charity boards he encouraged you to join, the world travels he arranged around your interests." "You don't understand," Margaret insisted. "Everything came with strings. His money, his decisions, his life. I was just an accessory." "So you decided to drug him?" "I was desperate. Richard said it would be temporary, just until we could get him help." help or access to his accounts. The facade cracked. You don't know what it was like living with someone who never failed, never struggled, never needed anyone. Do you know how small that makes you feel? Small enough to steal, Chen pressed. Small enough to forge signatures. Small enough to watch your husband drink poisoned tea every night for 6 months. It wasn't poison, just something to help him sleep. Chen produced the toxicology report. Enough benzodiazepine to cause memory loss, confusion, and physical dependency. You researched the dosages, Mrs. Hamilton. You knew exactly what you were doing. Margaret broke down, then sobbing dramatically. But I saw juror number 4, an elderly man himself, shake his head in disgust. The tears that might have saved her years ago now seemed like just another performance. My testimony came on day 3. Chen walked me through our marriage, the business success, the family dynamics. I tried to be fair, acknowledging my flaws, my focus on work, the times I'd been absent or preoccupied. Were you perfect? Chen asked. No husband is. But I loved my wife and provided for my family. I never imagined that would be a crime. Blackwood's cross-examination came at me like a prize fighter jabbing at every vulnerability. You testified against your own son, didn't you? He stole from the company, from employees' pension funds. But you could have handled it privately. Instead, you chose public humiliation. I chose justice. Something about personal responsibility you might not understand. She smiled coldly, like the responsibility to notice your wife's unhappiness, her loneliness. I noticed she was spending time with my brother. I noticed the new clothes, the trips, the jewelry. I thought I was making her happy. By throwing money at her? By providing the life she said she wanted. Back and forth, we went Blackwood, trying to paint me as cold and controlling me, trying to defend 40 years of marriage without sounding bitter or vindictive. The jury watched intently, weighing every word. David's trial followed immediately after. He strutted into court like he owned it, apparently believing his charm could overcome evidence. His strategy was to blame everything on Margaret and Richard, painting himself as a manipulated son, trying to help his poor, abused mother. It might have worked if Jake hadn't found the emails. Dozens of messages between David and associates, planning the asset division, joking about putting the old man in a home, discussing which properties to sell first. One particularly damning exchange showed David researching how long before dementia patients typically die and calculating inheritance timelines. I was trying to understand my father's condition, David claimed on the stand. What condition? Chen asked. The one your mother was creating with drugs. I didn't know about the drugs. Chen produced phone records. Then why did you text your mother and I, quote, up the dose? He's still too sharp. David's composure finally cracked. He destroyed my life, sent me to prison. I lost everything because of him. You lost everything because you stole, Chen corrected. And when that wasn't enough, you tried to steal again. Only this time you added assault and attempted murder to your resume. The word murder hung in the air. That's what it had been, really. A slow-motion attempt to kill who I was, to erase Knox Hamilton and leave only a shell they could manipulate. Richard's trial was the shortest. Faced with overwhelming evidence and the threat of his creditors, he took a plea deal. 15 years for conspiracy and fraud, with the possibility of parole in 7. He looked defeated as they led him away, the brother I'd once built tree houses with, reduced to a number in the system. During the weeks of testimony, I lived in a strange limbo. Days in court, evenings at home, trying to reclaim my space nights, lying awake, replaying memories, searching for signs I'd missed. The house felt different now. I'd had it professionally cleaned, replaced furniture that held too many painful associations, removed photos that had become lies. But Margaret's ghost lingered in every room. Sometimes I'd catch her perfume on the air, though I knew it was just memory playing tricks. Sarah stayed close, often joining me for dinner, or just sitting quietly while I worked through papers. We didn't talk much about the trials during those times. Instead, we remembered better days, family vacations, holiday traditions, moments when the love had been real, or at least seemed real. "Do you think she ever actually loved you?" Sarah asked one evening, voicing the question that haunted me. "I think she loved the idea of us." I answered after long consideration. The success story, the American dream. But somewhere along the way, the idea became more important than the reality. Betty, my office manager, who'd betrayed me, had been fired and charged as an accessory. Mike Kowalski faced his own legal troubles. Trust, I learned, was a luxury I could no longer afford. I hired new staff, implemented new safeguards, rebuilt my business practices from the ground up. But some wounds went deeper than business. I found myself questioning every relationship, wondering who else might be wearing a mask. The easy confidence that had built an empire was gone, replaced by a wariness that aged me more than any drug could have. The verdicts came in on a Thursday afternoon in December, almost exactly 1 year after my staged departure for Hawaii. Margaret guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 12 years with possibility of parole in 6. David guilty on all counts. Sentenced to 20 years consecutive with his previous sentence. Dr. Harrison license revoked 3 years for fraud and conspiracy. I sat in the courtroom as they led my family away for the last time. Margaret looked back once, and in her eyes I saw neither remorse nor defiance. Just emptiness. As if the woman I'd married had been hollowed out long ago, leaving only this bitter shell. David didn't look back at all. Outside the courthouse, Chen shook my hand. "Justice was served, Mr. Hamilton. I hope that brings you some peace." But justice and peace, I was learning, were different things entirely. That evening, Sarah and I sat on my back porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of ending. Walter worked in his garden next door, the steady rhythm of his movements a comfort. "So what now?" Sarah asked. "Now I rebuild, again, but differently this time." The next morning I met with lawyers to establish the Knox Hamilton Foundation for Elder Abuse Prevention. 50% of my estate would fund it, providing legal resources, safe housing, and advocacy for victims. Sarah agreed to serve on the board, bringing her legal expertise to protect others from what I'd endured. I sold the house 3 months later. Too many ghosts, too many memories of poisoned tea and midnight conspiracies. The new owners were a young family full of hope and plans. I wished them better luck than I'd had within those walls. The Colorado house which Margaret had tried to steal became my refuge. I'd forgotten how much I loved the mountains, the clear air, the silence that healed, rather than accused. I spent my days fishing the creek where I'd once taught David to cast a line before he decided he preferred stealing to earning. Walter and Mary visited often, their friendship a reminder that not everyone wore masks. We'd sit on the porch, old men who'd seen too much, finding peace in shared silence and spectacular views. Sarah came monthly sometimes with case files for the foundation, sometimes just to check on her old man. She was dating someone new, a prosecutor she'd met during the trials. A good man who understood the weight of betrayal and the value of trust. "Are you happy?" she asked during one visit, finding me reading by the fireplace with Max, the golden retriever I'd adopted from the local shelter. Another soul who'd been abandoned but still had love to give. Happy. I considered the word. Content, maybe. Grateful to be free. Still breathing. That's not the same as happy. No, I admitted, but it's enough for now. The truth was, happiness felt like a luxury I couldn't quite afford yet. Trust came even harder. I'd started seeing a therapist working through the trauma of discovering that your entire life was built on lies. Some days were better than others, but there were moments. Sunrise over the mountains, Max's enthusiasm for our daily walks, a successful case through the foundation another elder protected from predatory family. Small victories that accumulated like snowfall, gradually covering the scorched earth of betrayal. A year after the trials, I received a letter forwarded from my lawyer. Margaret's handwriting, which I'd once found charming, made my hands shake. I almost threw it away unread. But curiosity won. "Knox," it began. "I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve understanding. But I need you to know that it wasn't all a lie. There were good years, real years, before I let bitterness poison everything. I'm sorry for what I became. I'm sorry for what I did. I hope someday you can remember the woman I was before I lost myself. Margaret." I read it twice, then fed it to the fireplace. Apologies couldn't restore 40 years or undo 6 months of systematic poisoning. But watching the paper curl into ash, I felt something release in my chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but maybe the beginning of letting go. Life continued. The foundation grew, helping dozens of families. I testified before Congress about elder abuse, my story, helping to pass stricter laws. The construction business thrived under new management, my legacy secure, if different than I'd imagined. Sometimes late at night, I'd wonder about the road not taken. If I'd been a different husband, more attentive, less driven, would Margaret have chosen differently? If I'd been a different father, would David have valued what I built, instead of trying to steal it? But those questions led nowhere useful. We all made our choices. They chose betrayal. I chose survival. And in the end, that had to be enough. 3 years after that night in the shed, I met Grace at a foundation fundraiser. A widow whose husband had been victimized by a caregiver, she understood the particular pain of trust betrayed. We started as friends, sharing war stories and healing strategies. Slowly, carefully, it became something more. "I'm damaged goods," I warned her over dinner one evening. "We all are at our age," she replied. "The question is whether we let the damage define us." We took it slow, both too scarred for grand gestures or wild promises. But there was comfort in shared understanding, joy, in small moments, hope, in the possibility that life after betrayal could still hold sweetness. The silent wolf had survived his ordeal. Wounded, wary, but still standing. The pack that betrayed him was gone, scattered to prisons and regrets. But new bonds formed stronger for being chosen rather than assumed. On quiet mornings in the mountains, watching sunrise paint the peaks gold, I sometimes thought about Margaret in her cell, David in his. Did they regret their choices? Did they replay that midnight ambush and wish they'd chosen love over greed? I'd never know, and someday I hoped I wouldn't care. But for now, I had my mountains, my dog, my daughter, my work, and the gradual understanding that survival itself was a form of victory. The silent wolf had been tested and emerged scarred but unbroken. And in the end, that was enough. Life lesson. Sometimes the greatest threats come from those we trust most. When family becomes predator, when love becomes weapon, when home becomes hunting ground, we face the hardest battle of all survival without losing ourselves to bitterness. But we can emerge stronger, wiser, and still capable of trust carefully given. The scars remain, but they need not define us. We are more than our betrayals, stronger than those who tried to break us, and worthy of whatever happiness we can still find. I know many of you watching have your own stories of betrayal, your own midnight ambushes and poisoned tea. What helped you survive and rebuild? What signs did you miss? And what strength did you find? Please share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be the lifeline someone else needs to hear. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and consider subscribing for more content about resilience, survival, and the complicated truth of family relationships. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to an old man's tale of betrayal and redemption. Remember, you are stronger than those who try to tear you down, and your story isn't over until you say it is. Stay strong, stay aware, and most importantly, stay true to yourselves. Until next time, this is Knox Hamilton reminding you that the silent wolf may hunt alone, but we survivors run together.